The original Star Wars turns 46 this year, so today we explore 46 behind-the-scenes facts. Some hardcore fans might not even know these, so let's see how many you know. The iconic opening crawl was inspired by the Flash Gordon serials of the 1930s. George Lucas wanted to capture the nostalgic feeling of those classic space adventures. And George even tried to buy the rights to Flash Gordon in the early 70s, but was denied. The Flash movie was even supposed to be directed by famous Italian director Federico Fellini. The Cantina Band's music origins have a weird history. The direction that composer John Williams got from George Lucas was, quote, "Imagine several space creatures finding 1930s Benny Goodman swing music in a time capsule and how they might interpret it. And people say George Lucas isn't a good director? That's brilliant." Did you know that the original title for Star Wars wasn't Star Wars? It was initially called The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. What? Quite a mouthful, right? But all the way back in 1973, after completing his final cut of American Graffiti, George had been working on his space opera, and in this 13-page treatment, he called it simply The Star Wars. He pitched this treatment to multiple studios. All would turn it down, one of which was Walt Disney Pictures. The original concepts for Chewbacca and Han Solo were quite different from what we see today. Han was supposed to be a green lizard creature with gills, and Chewie's early concept art was used later in 2014 as the base for the Rebels character Zeb Orrelios. The Millennium Falcon wasn't always the fastest ship in the galaxy. Originally, it was designed to be a small, sleek ship, but the production team decided to go for a used universe look. Great call. For design direction, George Lucas simply said, quote, "Make it look like a hamburger." And that gave us the iconic hunk-of-junk Falcon that we know and love. The original Death Star's design wasn't without its challenges. The iconic trench run scene was added to cover a massive cosmetic flaw in the Death Star model. A flat 2D surface wouldn't look great on film. First-time apprentice model builders who were hired for Star Wars were hazed by making them build pieces of the trench for weeks on end, which had massive amounts of detail. If you survived that, you got to work on other shots. R2-D2's beeps and boops were created by using a combination of synthesizers and manipulated analog sounds, all created by sound designer Ben Burtt, who even used his own voice for some of R2's noises. He did this to give R2 a more human and childlike quality to his character, and it worked. R2-D2 is one of the most beloved movie characters of all time. James Earl Jones provided the iconic voice for Darth Vader, but the man behind the mask was David Prowse. However, Prowse's voice was not considered menacing enough.
Was there any of the royal family on board? Who were you carrying?
Some say that Prowse was disappointed by this, but he knew his voice wouldn't be in the final cut. In his contract, he was never scheduled for additional dialogue recording in the post-production phase. You'd be amazed by how many people didn't know this about R2-D2. Although he is a mechanical droid, in some scenes of the film, an actor named Kenny Baker was actually inside the suit and would make facial expressions as he moved in R2 to give a more human quality. It totally worked. Mark Hamill will always be known as Luke Skywalker, but there were other actors up for the part. Kurt Russell, who was a big child star with Disney, Charles Martin Smith, who had appeared in Lucas's previous film, American Graffiti, and William Catt, who would go on to be in one of my favorite shows as a kid, The Greatest American Hero. Before the days of CGI, the special effects team used practical models and techniques. In some shots, the Death Star was a flat painting with holes poked in it, and a stage light behind it to make it seem like there was life. Sneaky, sneaky. Lightsabers were created by rotoscoping, a process that involves tracing over live-action footage frame by frame. And with there being 24 frames a second, this was a lot of frames. Originally, they tried to use reflective surfaces on the sabers while they shot the scenes to save them a ton of time in post-production, but that didn't look realistic enough for Lucas. While most Star Wars fans know the original film was shot at Elstree Studios in London, can you name other famous films shot there? Here are a few: The Shining, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Dirty Dozen, and most of the Indiana Jones films, and many of the James Bond films. Star Wars revolutionized movie merchandising. George Lucas negotiated to keep the merchandising rights in 1975, a move that made him a billionaire outside of the box office success and allowed him to finance his own films, making him the biggest independent filmmaker of all time. The iconic Star Wars poster was created by artist Tom Jung, who was given just 3 weeks to complete it. The poster became an instant classic and is still celebrated today. However, it was the art of Frank Frazetta that inspired Jung. Can you see the influence? The editing process in the original Star Wars faced major challenges. The film's original editor, John Jimson, left the project due to creative differences. George Lucas, being an editor himself, wanted Jimson to work in a style that Lucas wanted. To quote Lucas, "faster and more intense." Lucas took over the editing alongside his wife at the time, Marcia Lucas, Paul Hirsch, and Richard Chew. Those 3 editors would all receive Oscars for their brilliant work. Did you know that the Star Wars Rebel Alliance symbol is a combination of the Phoenix and the Starbird? It perfectly captures the spirit of the rebellion rising from the ashes to challenge the Empire. Carrie Fisher was just 19 when she filmed the original Star Wars. She brought a level of wit, sophistication, and strength that George Lucas was looking for that young character. This was partly due to Carrie already being Hollywood royalty, being around showbiz her entire life, thanks to her mother, Debbie Reynolds, and father, Eddie Fisher. Carrie also spoke other languages and was already well-traveled. George Lucas's life was almost cut short at age 18 due to a high-speed car crash. His dream was to be a race car driver, but after the accident, he decided to go to film school, and the rest is history. But you will still see George Lucas at racing events, and if you ever meet him, don't talk to him about Star Wars. Instead, if you talk cars, you will probably be able to get a conversation and a smile out of him. Even though Harrison Ford had worked on Lucas's film American Graffiti before Star Wars, Ford wasn't initially intended to play Han Solo. He was simply hired to read lines with other actors auditioning for the main roles.
They're gonna destroy your whole system.
Yeah, I know they're gonna follow, and they're gonna bring the Death Star.
But eventually won the part himself. And now we can't imagine anyone but Harrison playing Han Solo. The number of space aliens in the Star Wars universe is staggering. But did you know that the cantina scene alone features over 60 different alien designs? Many of them were reused from other movies, and some of them are even used again in The Return of the Jedi. Ben Burtt, the sound designer for the original Star Wars, created the iconic blaster sounds by hitting a guy wire on a radio tower with a wrench. The sound has become synonymous with the Star Wars universe, just as much as the Wilhelm scream. Princess Leia's gold bikini became one of the most iconic costumes in film history. Carrie Fisher even referred to it as what supermodels will eventually wear in the 7th ring of hell. But in the original Star Wars, Carrie wasn't allowed to have a bra because it would be seen through the costume that she was wearing, with George Lucas famously telling her, "There is no underwear in space." The Stormtrooper armor was made from vacuum-formed plastic. The design was influenced by the look of Japanese samurai armor, and sculptor Liz Moore was one of the artists who brought it to life. But she was unable to see her work on the screen due to her untimely death. John Williams' score for Star Wars is legendary. But how long did it take him to score the first Star Wars soundtrack? It took him exactly 2 months to compose and 8 days to record at Anvil Studios in Denham, England. You won't believe this Star Wars story. The X-Wing and Y-Wing models used in the original film were actually small-scale miniatures, and none of the original models survived due to them being blown up or having degraded over time. One of the model's artists, Greg Jen, unfortunately passed away, but his family found an original model used in the film in his garage. And after it was verified for screen use, it was auctioned off and fetched $3.1 million. Greedo was played by 3 actors: Paul Blake during the main principal photography, Maria de Aragorn for close-ups, and Larry Ward performing the voice and speaking a simplified form of Quechua, which is a South American language.
Macanqui.
Darth Vader's iconic breathing sound was created by placing a microphone inside a scuba tank regulator. Simple, yet hauntingly effective. And the original voice of Darth Vader was supposed to be Citizen Kane film director Orson Welles. Can you imagine that?
That I'll do everything in my power to protect the underprivileged.
The phrase, "May the Force be with you," was supposed to be something different. The original line from the first script said, "May the Force of others be with you." Can you see that selling on a t-shirt? And notice the character name in the first line, Mace Windu, and this was in 1974. George would eventually bring that character to life in 1999's The Phantom Menace. What was thought as a Star Wars marketing blunder is now seen as pure genius. When Star Wars was released in 1977, the first action figures wouldn't be available for kids until the spring of 1978. But in Christmas of 1977, Kenner thought up the early bird set, where parents would buy a certificate that kids would fill out, send it in, and then 4 to 6 months later, they would be able to get the first Star Wars action figures. Sounds crazy, right? But it worked. And now, that original set in pristine condition goes for tens of thousands of dollars. Star Wars got rejected by many movie studios, including United Artists and Universal, who had just made George Lucas's American Graffiti. Even Alan Ladd Jr. at Fox didn't quite understand the concept when George Lucas told him about it, but he believed in Lucas's abilities as a director so much, he greenlit Star Wars, and the rest is history. After initial principal photography of the original Star Wars, George Lucas had no special effects shots, which were painfully behind schedule. So in the first edit, he used World War II footage from dogfights. This actually worked out in favor of Lucas because this was used by the effects team as reference shots to achieve exactly what Lucas envisioned. The classic wipe transitions in Star Wars were inspired by the work of Akira Kurosawa, a legendary Japanese filmmaker. It's a subtle homage to the cinematic influences on George Lucas. The concept of the Force was influenced by various religions and philosophical ideas, including Taoism and Buddhism. But the Force was originally called Ashla, and the Jedi were originally called the Dianogas. George Lucas drew heavily from Joseph Campbell's 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, when crafting the Star Wars narrative. Campbell would write another book called The Hero's Journey in 1990 after the original Star Wars trilogy was completed. The Hero's Journey template is evident in the character arc of Luke Skywalker and others. Lucas was actually a student of Campbell's when he was in college at USC in the 1960s. Campbell called George Lucas one of his greatest pupils. The opening shot of the Star Wars destroyer chasing the Rebel blockade runner is one of the most iconic in film history. But did you know this was the last shot to be completed in the film's production? Editing Star Wars proved to be a daunting task. The original cut of the film was over 2.5 hours long, and you can see fan-made films of this original cut online. Go ahead, Google it. Tell them that Star Wars Rewind sent you. What was one of the most frustrating things about making Star Wars? You'd be surprised. The decision to use an opening crawl for Star Wars was a nod to the old Flash Gordon serials. To actually make it though, it was a time-consuming process. And to achieve this, they had to practically film the words as a physical model and build a camera rig to get it just right. Then they had to do it all over again for other languages that the film would be released in. Sir Alec Guinness, who portrayed Obi-Wan Kenobi, initially had reservations about the role and didn't want to do it. However, he later admitted that he was glad to be a part of something that brought joy to so many people. Lucas also gave Guinness points on the film's profits, making Sir Alec a very rich man. Do you know how long the original Star Wars stayed in theaters in 1977? A whopping 135 weeks and grossed over $775 million, which in today's money is $3.9 billion. Making Star Wars the first true blockbuster. Yes, I know about Jaws, but do me a favor, go to your closet right now and pick out one Jaws t-shirt. Yeah, that's what I thought. In May 1974, George Lucas's rough draft of Star Wars was so massive that he cut out most of the first 2 acts and focused on the 3rd act as the main storyline. He would later use these 2 first acts as the base for 1999's prequel trilogy. George Lucas funded some of the production of Star Wars primarily with his own money, mostly to fund the effects shop, now called ILM. He even borrowed against his house to cover some of the costs, taking a huge personal risk that ultimately paid off. 2 unknown TV specials were made after the success of Star Wars. We all know the Star Wars Holiday Special, but there was also the Richard Pryor Show, who did a Star Wars special, and also an episode of the Donnie and Marie Show, both coming out in the fall of 1977. The iconic lightsaber sounds were created by combining the hum of an old television set and the buzz of a film projector, and the saber hilts were taken from a 1940s flash handle from a Graflex camera. That item is now rare and highly collectible by Star Wars fans. Darth Vader's original helmet design was inspired by samurai helmets, and when filming, David Prowse said he couldn't see a thing and had to actually guess at where people were. Here's a good Star Wars behind-the-scenes fact. The flying land speeder was actually achieved by placing mirrors at the base of the speeder, then placing Vaseline on the lens that sold the effect even further. So those were 46 facts about Star Wars to celebrate its 46-year anniversary. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and also share your favorite Star Wars memories down there in the comments. And visit all of my links down there in my description to support the channel. And to see more videos like this, click these videos on your screen now. And as always, my friends, thank you, and I will see you next time.